It is a difficult task after the two prior presentations to talk about this very specific and technical topic on perspectives of monitoring supervision in the case of the insurance industry in a very special environment of acknowledging the work you have been done and the work we have been doing as an industry, as a country. And basically our presentation is framed within a pillar of construction of well-being and development. Greetings to Dr. Botero, to Dr. Javier, and all the participants in this event. It is important to have this space for the superintendency to have a good dialogue, as has been a characteristic with this industry. This basic message starts by acknowledging something. This presentation has in common with the prior presentation is that it's linked to the aspect of the fact that many companies and individuals could have a level of coverage of a third party that could manage risks that we are facing on a daily basis and risks that are affecting and exposing us. For companies and individuals, it is important to be aware of the fact that the use of an insurance is a specific and determining factor. Unfortunately, in some cases, we do not disseminate this message of what it means to have an insurance, and this is why we want to share this image with you. It states basically that we are exposed to many difficult situations of risk, and in a way we want to have a protection that will allow us to see the environment with a higher level of certainty. And this is what is the different scenario of these hands above the hands with dark skies and below the hands with the green type of effect. The best way to mitigate these effects, these uncertain situations, these elements that could have an effect on the lives of people and businesses. We mentioned and we hope that it would have to use the insurance. Some people said, well, I rather don't buy an insurance, but it's better to have the insurance and not to need the insurance than rather needing the insurance and not having one. For the financial superintendency in industry, we have a value that should be extended to many people, not in the world of mandatory type of insurances, as Dr. Malagon mentioned, but an environment where the idea is to be able to transfer to a professional this type of risk. From this perspective, we still continue with the same message. Why do we have to wait for these images? Why, or what is the economic reasons to take an insurance not to have to experience this type of situations? Difficult times of difficult situations that if you put yourselves in the shoes of someone that has experienced these type of catastrophic events, then this is what you said, what would happen if I had an insurance? What about someone to be able to cover professionally these negative consequences of these type of risks that become a reality? This is basic for this balance between creation of institutionality, understanding and commitment of the industry, and trust, confidence on this product or service that is being provided by the industry. This is basic balance. As a superintendency, sometimes it's difficult to balance all these things that are at stake around this type of decision. A message of promotion, of support on the importance for a country of your industry, the industry of insurances. It is a powerful type of industry that is moving in the right direction. I agree with the presentation of David, where sometimes this is not just to measure an industry by volume of premium or number of contracts, but for each of these elements, I just bring 6 elements. We have not included all the elements, but we have 6 elements. If we see this from the perspective of people being close to the benefits for the situation, then we have these very important elements that we have to acknowledge. At the first level, number one, agriculture and livestock sector, we have 109,000 hectares insured. We have producers where specifically they made the right decision to be able to have an insurance company, specific policies of Finagro, to be able to have balanced risk for the businesses and their development. And this is the potential that they have to be able to advance within this type of industry. We are following the right pathway, but we want a little bit more thrust. A home, fire, and earthquake. More than 1.1 million people covered. This is a well-being for families. We want more of this as well in these mandatory services. Besides the discussion of evasion, paid or non-paid, we have 8 million cars that are insured. This is the possibility to be able to manage adequately one public health problem, not only for those that are driving a car, but for everyone, those that are riding a bicycle or the pedestrians. More than half of the victims of traffic accidents are people that use the road and not really those that are driving a vehicle. Regarding labor risk, we are speaking about people, about families. We see how 10.7 million workers have some type of benefit, or they enjoy this benefit, and this translates into transferring these benefits to the members of the family in the case of these type of events. Then we have individual life insurance, 2 million people insured, and an important point that was mentioned by Malagón, the minister, this decennial type of insurance. I want to dwell on this scheme because for the superintendency it's important to transfer the next messages. First, today the financial superintendency issues a bulletin to establish this decennial type of insurance to be able to start offering this product and this type of service. We want to have a more dynamic in the description of the issuing of this type of policies. We know that it's difficult to have the certification of engineers, but there is a basic message. The certification will not be understood as superintendency the way that it is transferring responsibility of what you should do as an insurance company. From this perspective, for the superintendency, it has to be very valid. The decision of a company to offer this service with their own engineers while they get the certification, or even with the certification to be able to have a level of control on those that are being certified. And this is an important message. These 6 elements have something in common. They are going to transform the lives of people. We add value, we give well-being to the community to be able to withstand these events. We see an important role in the construction of this environment with the different agents that contribute to the consolidation of this industry. We have 7 main characteristics where we continue working. We continue building the long-term vision from the part of supervision. It is an industry that has progress in terms of governance, in terms of the supply of information, transparency, and quality. We have challenges towards the future, very significant, NIV 17, but we are following the right pathway, taking advantage of institutionality, and this is the second message. It is important to Dr. Botero to continue with our task. I remember that you have been in Fase Colda since 2013, and we remember that at that time we have some dynamics of the prior president of the association. We have been able to consolidate today this type of work that we consider a technical work, a transparent work, with a streamlining and a very type of complex industry, but very fluid type of information. The objective is to protect the financial consumer not only being professional, the insurance companies, but as well those institutions that are in charge of intermediation. It is important in one way to acknowledge that we need to tackle basic discussion in this environment on their role to be played with these different agents that participate in the market. Regarding comprehensive supervision, consolidated supervision, the large financial institutions are an important contribution to the country. Of these 13, 6 have an insurance company that are part of these groups or that are linked to these groups. Maybe from the beginning we don't see the benefits or these new norms, but in terms of strategy of concentration, contacts and links and operations, we are going to have a new environment to help us to make more dynamic this industry. This risk-based supervision is the road to the future. We need to be acquainted with the business. We need to concentrate on the right aspects, emergent risk, task, how these control lines work. And finally, a public policy that is coherent, where supervision is an important pillar, but as well regulation and the international standards that Felipe Lega is going to present will help us to have in this environment the peace of mind for insurance company, for underwriters to be certain, because this is the industry that is following the right pathway, that is doing things right. And if we are doing things right, then figures would have to support this type of dynamic.
But I would like to move on to the detail of the figures. And truly, this dynamism we see is that there's a new role, and the Minister of Finance mentioned it yesterday, how for insurance companies, just as for other institutional investors, there will be an adjustment and certain proposals that will be discussed. But I think there's a new window of work here, and I want to emphasize solely on the figures in the bottom. Thanks to the activity we're seeing in the capitals market, we're being capable of turning the figures around in the insurance companies. The technical result is 1.4 billion Colombian pesos negative. And if we add to this the result of the entire exercise and the yields that investments have, well, these figures change and can somehow generate a better balance. In this environment where we're going to have flexibilization in the investment regimes, it will be fundamental for you to understand clearly how risk management is being done, how we allocate assets, how we are doing the measurements for this balance to remain in good shape. What does it mean? What does this mean then? A recognition, and this industry deserves this recognition. As of November, just as we promised last year, none of the insurance companies that's within these assumptions will ever go back to the superintendency for prior authorization of a branch or sector. This means that you will come to the superintendency and you will tell us, I started working on this. We will no longer be in the discussions that sometimes resulted being very valuable, but other times not so much. You have an industry that has advanced in standards, an industry that has developed good practices and deserves this recognition. This is risk-based supervision, not having a control at the entryway, but having a coaching and accompaniment that's continuous. There's perhaps 37 areas, of which only those in Social Security, with the exception of the mandatory car vehicle, SOAT, will be supervised generally. This means that the window of opportunity for the businesses are at your disposal, not at the Superintendency of Finance. You will have to start having a different responsibility than what we are expecting. What are we expecting? We're basically expecting for the defense lines of the institutions to operate very differently. The 10-year insurance, you will be asking yourselves, it falls within this scheme. I don't need to authorize you. I created this in a bulletin that will be published today, but you will no longer need to come to the superintendency for me to authorize authorize an area. You already have a license, you're the responsible administrators of that environment, and we will simply need to fulfill some conditions that will fully authorize you to operate your business. So what does this mean? It implies greater cost in default or non-compliance. It will say, yes, you fulfilled, you were compliant, here's the keys to the vehicle, but we will have certain rules. You can drive it whenever you want, how you want it, but if we find A, B, or C, there will be more costly consequences than we initially were looking at. This is risk-based supervision. I don't generate much value at the entry, but I do generate value in the day-to-day. And this is a tool that we're using in the different industries. What does elevating costs mean? We're making public who's in the individual authorized regime and who's in the general authorization regime. The industry should be the one grading and weighing this, not us. You do a feasibility study when acquiring a license, you enter the market, we supervise and monitor you, and then it will be your decision the way how you behave within this scheme. What do I expect then? Well, there's some levels of responsibility that we would like to be worked on, very much emphasized on the compliance of what you interacted with the superintendency then. Now it has to be done within the organizations. The first, the second, and third defense lines will have a very big responsibility. So I will no longer ask you, let me see your technical note, but I will confirm, validate how all the defense lines are coordinated and operating so that the area that I decided to operate in is has adequately established fees and managed, and which ends up being as transparent as possible. This is a different dynamics where you will probably learn a lot, and we fully convinced, yes, that we will have a new environment of engagement with the industry. All this will translate into some grades. This is a matrix. Perhaps you probably know this, where on a quarterly basis, unless something extraordinary happens, we are reviewing the entire insurance industry. Each of the insurance companies has a matrix for this. The holdings, when appropriate, will also have one where each of these red boxes is going to help us grade the understanding of what's happening. And why do I tell you this? Because I want you to have certainty as to how I'm going to look at you in this new environment. The superintendency is going to rate your operation, the different supervision functions. There's 4 categories. I don't want to dwell in the details of each category, but on the effect this causes. If I have a good grade, an adequate grade, this I will surely will be one where I don't do in situ supervision, but what I have is continuous communication with the actuary and with the company CEO. Of the contrary, if we have a grade where improvement is required, the intensity of the supervision is truly different. And this will help us all understand very well how we effectively move the grading of these institutions. These grades will be conveyed to you individually. We will have sessions where we can tell you, listen, I'm looking at you, I see you like this, and that, and you should move in this direction, and my expectation is A, B, or C, and we'll meet again in 3 months or 6 months, and if this grade has not changed, then we will need to begin intensifying our supervisory role. This prioritizes, gives you certainty in the way you do business, and of course will favor stability of our system. Nevertheless, not everything is good news. Not everything is recognition or responsibility. There are challenges that we need to work on. This year, looking at our presentations of 1, 2, and 3 years ago, we took 2 products as example of the challenges that we face. And these 2 products are associated to the mandatory insurance for traffic accident, SOAT, and the compliance. For those of you who've had the opportunity of attending these annual conferences, will recall that the superintendency said to you, we have different working tables where we are going to put on the table all this. We invited you to many meetings at my office. Fasecolda was very supportive in the technical terms and information. And we established certain commitments as industry, as country, as institutionality. We said, we are going to move towards X. After 2 years, a bit more, perhaps 3 years, I would say, we have found certain elements in a diagnosis that I want to share with all of you, with the sole purpose, and again, of having certainty, of having clear rules, and of showing you how much added value supervision has. In advance, I let you know there is a lot that we have. For the SOAT, we talked a lot about the agents that interact here. A message that we have as an industry is to continue working. This is an insurance, not only a mandatory one, but addresses a public health issue. This is very important that we're very aware of this. Because this is not something of the insurance companies or the ARS. It's something that passes through all these agents that are here. And we have been working at some technical tables where you have been parties to. We establish commitments, we do follow up, we establish goals, and we say we're doing well in this, not so well in that. We're doing well in many things, but we're not as good in some others. I wanted to recall what are the principles upon which, from the law, this public health control is established: equity, sufficiency, and moderation. Upon these three pillars, what I want to tell to you is our diagnosis after 3 years of work together with you on how much we've progressed and how much is left in terms of, on the public side, we sought in this time experience for the health system to guarantee access to medical service of the victims, regardless of their having or not insurance. This is a situation managed from this perspective. A sustainable tariff or fee scheme based on risk. Also, we're having a compensation scheme that is sufficiently powerful to align incentives in the policies I sell and the risks I'm assuming. A contributions and transfer scheme that guarantees medical service and the efficient management of the resources on the public side. And then on the private side, a continuous offer, a balanced one of insurance coverage for all vehicle categories, efficiencies in management and administration of this branch, saying, for instance, that we're going to work a lot in automation, in digitalization, we're going to work on the brokerage fees, etc. And the third, a responsible use of the coverage, which was under the owners. So these are the expectations upon which we're building our supervision scheme. It's nothing different from what we're doing sometimes. So what do we have? This is information that I must also tell you is what the insurance companies convey to the superintendency. It's very hard work by the industry and Fasecolda of compiling the information and organizing it. Sometimes we had to sort through a lot of information, try to fine-tune it, etc. And today we have a very mature system of this information that we can study and understand what happened throughout 2018. What do we have in terms of exposure? On the public side, understanding everything that is covered by the scheme other than the insurance companies, and as private, what's being protected or covered from the perspective of the insurance company. Remember that this is a scheme that's not only under the insurance companies, but is somewhat an issue that is being managed as public health. Victims, 37,000 victims, 4 victims per hour given service without being associated to a mandatory traffic accident insurance. 700,000 victims, almost 79 victims every hour we were seeing in the information being delivered. And the costs, public, 172 billion Colombian pesos. And in the private, 1.5 billion Colombian pesos, approximately 2.2 million per victim. The cost of this, 76 pesos daily on average, to have coverage, a 365-day coverage. Well, the superintendency, following its commitments, did monitoring work I don't want to call it inside or off-site. This is like a mystery shopping exercise where we appointed a team that quoted with 5 insurance companies for different categories. In this case, for 300 vehicles, 67% one category and 33% another category. Results of this exercise, the first pillar of guaranteeing coverage based on digital with expectations very much below what were the commitments for Bogota, for Medellin, Boyacá, and the Caribbean coast, both for one and for the other categories. We didn't see much movement in guaranteeing greater product supply for the people. If it's not a matter of fraud, then we need to discuss very well these figures. But from the get-go, what we saw was it was not moving in the analysis of the issuance. These 5 companies, when we reviewed what was the reason why insurance was not taken or subscribed, we saw there was errors in the system. Others said contact an advisor. One company said in this region we cannot issue the policy. We want to know why. And another company said it doesn't meet our insurability policies. In a certain way, if we're building an instrument that attends to public health and issues that affect the entire society and all the agents we were analyzing, then this is a situation where we clearly believe there is a lot of room to work in terms of equity and access. After these findings, we said, well, let's continue discussing to see what's happening. Let's go over the compensation scheme, and allow me, I didn't want to be to dare to dwell into this, but this is clearly the compensation scheme. We say, well, let's put on a slide what should be the reason for being of a compensation scheme in a category. Vehicles, type A, type B, type C, and this is what we found. For the type A category, the premium 780 billion Colombian pesos, the payments for 1.3 billion pesos, and the accidents 116%, type B and type C. What this should guarantee the insurance company A and insurance company B, and this doesn't affect the system, but this is the imbalance that we're seeing in those who assume risk and what's being paid for that risk. Under this scheme, what should happen is that there should be, or there's categories that should be compensated versus others that somehow need to resort to these resources. When we see the operation, we find 5 or 6 elements that we're calling upon you for reflection. We continue having very clear results where there's an important number of vehicles that are not being able to access a SOAT policy for whatever reason. This is a fact. And we do find 4 additional elements upon which it would seem that the distortions generated in the market are not necessarily aligned to what is the principle of sufficiency and that of moderation. Under compensation, the methodology itself, we find that there's very significant differences between the idealized premium, which is the one used to decide who compensates who, and the risk, the premium risk. As an example, we brought a range, and we need to further fine-tune this, but we find differences between 12 up to 158% in different categories. This means that within the insurance companies, there's somehow some that are compensating more than they should have to compensate other insurance companies. We see that the adjustment scheme is rigid, it's static, it doesn't move, and that's difficult in the understanding we're having of the operation of this industry. There are certain safety factors that are defined there that explain these differences. And when we analyze closely why these safety factors are generated, Well, there isn't a very complete rationale, very technical. We also need to go in there to validate this further. But somehow it is difficult to say that a reasoning of this nature should have such a broad range. We also see that somehow the incentives of the government itself, this takes away dynamism of this mechanism. The methodology itself needs to be revised so that it is as more dynamic, and this ultimately seems is generating incentives that are misaligned that result in that certain levels of compensation amongst company do not correspond to the risk they're assuming. And this ultimately will be like, to a certain way, a vicious circle where if I don't receive adequate compensation, then what is the incentive for me to enter a segment or a particular segment or market? Given these characteristics and considering the commitments we acquired, both as superintendency as well as industry, we truly believe that here we need to give further thrust. The company then decides to include within its work plan of the SOAT the adjustment to the scheme, the superintendency, and this will probably be a scheme that collects and solves government rigidity issues. We will move to a more dynamic world in terms of incentives, that it be fully foreign to the natural tensions of government that could be in a scheme like this. And here for us, it is prioritary then that as of next year, we continue working specifically on how we can significantly complement this compensation scheme that allows these incentives that we are expecting as an industry. All this within an environment that we have seen since the beginning. The rate or the fee is not the response for everything. We have fraud, let's increase the fee. Or we have costs, let's increase it. No, this cannot be the fee cannot be the adjustment variable specifically in terms of the SOAT. These are the figures that we're seeing during 2018. You know that every year the financial superintendency sits down, collects the information you deliver, conducts analysis based on these three principles, and every year the superintendency says there's sufficiency, there's very hard work with the industry confirming figures, etc. And this is the exercise. We have categories again, type A, B, and C, and we see significant improvements. We have somehow understood that the sufficiency margin is affected by two very important variables: frequency, and we're also seeing how on contributing vehicles, which are the type V, a reduction in this frequency, and we also saw a reduction in the exposures in subsidized categories. This necessarily gives us a world where the superintendency is going to assess the levels of sufficiency under these terms. And another basic message and important that we found under sufficiency is the operation and brokerage expenses. There was a commitment in our trying to move to a more digital world, where the digital world should reduce, at least in this product, those brokerage costs. We, within our technical note, only consider expenses up to 23%. From there higher, spend them whatever you want as a company, but I won't have it into consideration in terms of the sufficiency of the fee. But there was a commitment in making progress in cost reduction. What we found, a relatively different situation, operating and brokerage expenses that not only exceed that 23%, they're close to 31% today. And implicitly, this is having a growth rate of 12%. So my message regarding how this functions, operation and brokerage costs, is that we need to continue working to simplify, to be more efficient in this process of digitalization that we began, because we are not seeing this in reductions or significant improvements in terms of operation expenses. As I was saying, this is indifferent to us because we only go to that 23%, but as an industry, we did have that commitment, and we are stepping away from it. Given this scenario and thinking a bit on the message that Mr. Suarez mentioned yesterday during his opening remarks of certainty on moving along the rules of the game that allow us to have a long-term vision, the superintendency has considered as very fundamental that we have an objective and technical rule capable of estimating the behavior of the SOAT fee that goes beyond sufficiency. And it is that we all know that once the corresponding calculations are made within a specific range, we know whether the fee remains exactly the same, if there's a reduction, or contrarily, there's an increase in that fee. So our third message in terms of SOAT is that we will establish in the coming weeks an exercise that we've already ran and assessed that we're going to share with the industry to understand well what is that objective rule, and that both you and us are entirely certain of what is the environment or will be the environment for the next year, the next validity period for SOAT. Not because we have not done it, and here I want to clarify. The webpage, our webpage includes the technical notes. We've published them. The duty of clearly understanding how this calculation is done. And in terms of sufficiency, we've seen things, for instance, like Japan. Japan has a point that is 0. It doesn't allow a range. There's other countries that do allow a range to move in one sense or another. From the perspective not of sustainability, but of adjustment of this fee. So in this environment, there will be a cap and a low point to maintain this trust, this level of trust that will allow us to know how to measure the effects of the fee, if there's sufficiency or insufficiency. Second commitment in this accountability presentation, so to speak. Last year we said we will intensively dedicate ourselves to guarantee everybody that we are doing this very well. So here then are the results of that task and effort under compliance. For us, well, clearly we have begun very intense discussions, especially in 2018 and this year, in supervisory processes with different actors of the industry. You will surely have learned that we've held meetings by segment, by company segments. We took the most similar companies and grouped them and had meetings with them. We presently have 4 companies that are already adopting specific measures in terms of the operation of this product, because we are fully convinced of the support and the importance that for the works and the state itself this industry represents. Better standards in terms of what? Here are our 6 pillars around which we moved in this diagnosis of supervision: tariffs, reserves, risk retention, risk accumulation, solvency, and of course the reinsurance contracts. What do we find in these environments? We found an administration that can advance in technically consolidating better management of this branch. We are along the right path, but we have 4 working lines upon which in the industry they should have peace of mind that subscription, accidents, reinsurance, and counter guarantees will take a quantitative leap in terms of what we're doing for the industry. We have found accumulation of risk without any control, technical control, and this has to be corrected immediately. Many technical requirements that sometimes are not well documented, that are not being fulfilled. Try to make this more rigor and formal in the taking, or suscripción in Spanish. Many times we found reserves constituted after the payment of the accident or the event. We have a scheme that should aim at having a different standard. Specific cases where we saw how the premium was paid before the existence of the risk, this had to be corrected. In terms of reinsurance, inadequate use of these non-proportional contracts. There's an important aspect here in terms of the reinsurance, and in terms of counter guarantees, very little or none, or those with a not very good quality. So this is the added value that is generated to a country of having very good supervision. We are sure that in this insurance event, that we will have a more solid, more technical, from a prudential and supervisory role for the risks not to materialize, or those that materialize can be assumed by the different entities. This will mean then 4 lines of actions for all the companies, for the industry as a whole. Some you will probably know, I hope you're not experiencing them firsthand, but are implemented. Many of them have started as of the second quarter of this year. Many administrative orders. Let me tell you that the superintendency, without prejudice of those that have already been issued, we will begin working where those that have not been technically aligned along these standards, the superintendency will issue a suspension. This is what I call of elevating the costs of having a general authorization. We are going to see, we hope that this is not the case. We've seen very good will by the companies, but where we cannot correct the trends, we will use this power for suspending commercialization of that branch. We will have penalties or sanctions. This is a very good message to convey to the industry. This is a responsibility of the company itself, or the legal person. Here we want to find whether the defense lines, again, are working or not working. So we're going to see sanctions probably addressed from a personal point to the actuaries. We have the responsible actuary figure for many years now, and I want to see how this is working, because this is the role he should be playing. We are going to see consumer defenders. So we're going to see in the roles of responsibility whether they're generating value. For compliance, we also want to include some changes in the rules, in the standards, and this will be discussed at a government level in case of required to complement recent accomplishment under supervision. We will see improvements in estimates or estimation of the reserves, in establishment of fees, and also correction of coverage of reinsurance of the different companies. And lastly, follow-up of all the recommendations that have already been issued. Here the purpose is but to continue consolidating that compliance is meeting the highest standards. This is a decision that will result in better establishment of the tariff or the fees. So we're seeing this in the companies already. So for us, basically then, this is the road that we have, the path we want to value. The superintendency generates value. I surely don't have many fans, given my previous presentations, but the industry can rest assured that the supervision has generated much value. We're being able to correct important assets and relevant aspects in order to guarantee, like the name of the convention says, that this country be a safer country. You make the decision of what is your level of conviction and participation in this accompaniment of these purposes. Thank you very much for your attention.